for what reasons a completely new kind of state system emerged in the 20th century. Because in the 20th century, for the first time in history, we observe the emergence of the so-called totalitarian state.
I buy the theory because, again, I into the idea that rational is limited, there is something beyond. But people with materialistic point of view are having hard time to grasp and digest what you just had to offer.
But the level of education definitely shows a positive correlation with the vulnerability for mass formation. The higher the level of education, the more susceptible for mass formation.
In this episode, I had the privilege of speaking with Professor Mattias Desmet. Professor Mattias is a professor of psychology at Ghent University at Belgium. He is the author of several books, including, most recently, The Psychology of Totalitarianism. What did we talk about? How classical dictatorship differ from modern totalitarianism? What is mass formation and why is it so scary? And why telling the truth is profoundly different than just giving rational argument. It was an important conversation, especially in the context of the current political crisis in Israel. I enjoyed a lot and I know you will too. Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Dr. Roi Yozevitch. In this channel, I speak and converse with the most interesting and influential people from all around the world, discussing science, philosophy, artificial intelligence, religion, and more. If you find this talk interesting, please consider subscribing, hit the bell button, and be part of this great community. And now, without further ado, Professor Mattias Desmet.
Professor Mattias Desmet, thank you so much for coming. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing well, Roy, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm glad that I can speak on an Israeli channel, actually.
Oh, and you're quite a celebrity. Before the recording started, I told you that people in the conservative right use your arguments, your book, your theories in the current Israeli debate, and we basically had the same thing with Tucker Carlson. It seems that before we dive into your theories, that they resonate somehow more with the conservative right of the political map. Would you agree?
Yes, I would agree. But I think we are more or less in the same situation now as a situation described by Marx and Engels in their Communist Manifesto. They described how the more conservative, how a new alliance seemed to be formed at the moment they wrote the Communist Manifesto, between conservatives and progressive people who both objected and against a dominant discourse at a certain time. And the strange thing is that there are two groups of people who can object to a dominant discourse: the people who are ahead of it and the people who are behind of it. And I think now that we are a little bit in the same situation since the corona crisis. On the one hand, you had conservative people who objected to it, and on the other hand, you had progressive people. And to be honest, I wouldn't know where to situate myself. Not because I'm a little conservative or a little progressive, but just because, in one way or another, I believe that my thinking, in a certain way, at least that's what I hope, transcends this polarity, because it's all about, in my opinion, what we are in this moment in history, what we really need is what Michel Houellebecq, and of course I quote a conservative writer now, but what Michel Houellebecq called an epistemological crisis, a metaphysical revolution. We need to think about the limitations of our rationalist view on man and the world, I think, because I truly believe that the Enlightenment tradition, no matter how fruitful it has been, and no matter how important it has been, and no matter how much it has given birth to one of the most beautiful creations of humanity, science, it's time now to transcend it, because all the problems we are facing now cannot be solved within that frame of thinking. We need to transcend it. That's a challenge we are facing. And that's how I like to see my work. And to be honest, I don't believe that I should choose which people read my work or use it. I just write it, and I hope that both conservatives and progressives and everyone who wishes to read it will read it, and maybe it can open their mind a little bit. That's what I hope. Yeah.
Okay, so I can just wish that two sides will think that you're the enemy, and which means that your books will have a lot of sales. But I want to start with something that is a little bit different, but I think it's very strongly connected to what we were about to talk about today. Your PhD dealt with methodological problems in academic research. And we know the replication crisis. I had Danny Kahneman on the show about mainly the replication crisis in psychology and other things. And you, in your PhD thesis, said that the methodological paradigms in academic research cannot yield to good results. So if you can please name just one example, one good example that there is an inherent flaw in these methodological approaches.
Yes, my PhD, I'm a professor in clinical psychology, but I also have a master degree in statistics, and my PhD was a very technical PhD focusing on the problems with academic research in psychology in particular, but also more in general, because I noticed that the problems that emerge in psychological research are of the same nature as those emerging in the medical sciences, for instance, in sociology and so on. And if I would name one flaw, methodological flaw, or one methodological problem which is so fundamental that we need a different fuel man in the world to leave it behind or to overcome it, then I would refer to the fact that while we try to measure everything, while we try to express everything in numbers, while we try to quantify everything, and while we seem to take research only serious when it uses quantities and numbers and statistical techniques to analyze these numbers and the correlations between these numbers, I believe that most phenomena in nature cannot be measured adequately. Or at least, we should be aware that if we try to measure them, the measurement outcome or the quantities that result from the measurement will be very subjective in nature and not objective at all. And that's the strange thing. It's something that I describe in a much less technical way than in my PhD, of course, but that's something that I describe in chapter 4 of my book, The Psychology of Totalitarianism, that there is a fundamental problem in measuring all kinds of phenomena in nature, because most phenomena in nature are intrinsically multidimensional, and numbers are always, or measuring, the act of measuring is always comparing an object or a phenomenon to the unidimensional scale of the real numbers. And the problem is that some phenomena can never, you need to reduce a phenomena to unidimensional characteristics to be capable of measuring it. You can only measure a car if you reduce it to an object that has a height, a width, a length, and then you can measure the height, the width, the length separately. But you cannot measure the object car on sich. You need to reduce it to unidimensional phenomena, and that's where that's what the problem is. Scientists now often look more like magicians. And to quote Nietzsche, Nietzsche said, "Science makes complex things look easy." And magic makes easy things look complex. And scientists became sometimes more magicians than scientists. They try to convince people that their research is sophisticated by using numbers and measurements. But actually, by doing that, they actually turn science into pseudoscience, which provokes the illusion in people that it is objective and accurate and sophisticated, while actually it starts from quantities that are not objective at all and that contain lots of measurement error. So that's one of the elementary problems of our approach now, and one of the problems that is at the basis, I think, of the academic crisis known as the replication crisis, because everyone thinks now that it is all about the money in academia, that the researchers want funds and that they start to commit fraud and so on. And that's a part of the problem, but it's less big, that part of the problem, as we used to think. The main problem, I think, is really an epistemological problem. It's an epistemological problem. We try to know in the wrong way. That's what I believe.
You know, I always thought that one of the reasons for the crisis, especially in the humanities, is that the humanities, ever since the 19th century, wanted to become like the science. As we have this distinction between science and humanities, and the science, like physics, is so accurate because it restricted itself to measuring like the velocity of the electron, of the position of the electron. And in chemistry, where the basic element is not the atom, but the molecule, it is much less precise. In biology, the basic element is a cell, much less precise. In psychology, the basic element is a person. In economics, the basic element is a society. Therefore, when we want to replicate the science, but we deal with such a multi-dimensional element like a person, society, we are bound to fail.
Indeed, that's right.
Okay. Now, because I don't want to waste your time, and because your interview with Tucker Carlson has subtitles in Hebrew, okay? So I don't want you to go over everything again. With your permission, let me just state out the most important thing, and you can add, okay? Because with your permission, I want to go over to the more interesting things. Mass formation, and this is a quintessential theory in your book, yes, what mass formation is. But mass formation is a phenomena that occurs when we have basically four conditions. One is less of, just a second, we don't have social connections, we don't have meaning, and many people feel what you call free-floating anxiety. And after they have free-floating anxiety, they have free-floating frustration and aggression. And when they have all those things, they can be manipulated, just like hypnosis, to one single voice that connects them. While when they are being connected again, they feel all the good things, and then mass formation is formed, and this hypnosis voice can steer them to do whatever it wants them to do. So this is a very simplistic schematic of your theory, but again, let's say that most of our viewers watch the Tucker Carlson interview. So could you please elaborate on the main important issues that are...
Yes, I can. Indeed. So my book, in which I describe the phenomenon of mass formation or crowd formation, my book is all about the question as to how, for what reasons, a completely new kind of state system emerged in the 20th century. Because in the 20th century, for the first time in history, we observe the emergence of the so-called totalitarian state. And the first two examples were the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. And many people think that the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany were dictatorships, classical dictatorships, but that's not true. That's not true. It were totalitarian systems, and totalitarian systems are something completely different of a classical dictatorship. And if we don't understand the difference, we will fall prey to new totalitarian systems. And in my opinion, and that's what I always defended, or what I always try to show, in my opinion, at this moment, we are really at risk of ending up in a new totalitarian system. And it will not be a communist totalitarian system or a fascist totalitarian system. It will be a technocratic totalitarian system. A technocratic totalitarian system, which is a so-called velvet glove totalitarianism. That means a totalitarian system which does not so much use terror, but which uses very excessively indoctrination and propaganda. And that's my book. And what I wonder in my book is, why did this new kind of state system, this totalitarian system, emerged for the first time in the 20th century? And what exactly is the difference with a classical dictatorship? And both questions find their answer, I think, at the psychological level. Because the difference between a classical dictatorship and a totalitarian system is the fact that a totalitarian system is based on the process of a so-called mass formation, a crowd formation, while a classical dictatorship is based on a completely different psychological mechanism. In a classical dictatorship, people are just scared of a small group of people whom they experience as having a huge aggressive potential, and for which reason people just accept that a small group of people unilaterally imposes its social contract to society. But the classical dictatorship is completely different. In a classical dictatorship, what first happens is the emergence of a very specific kind of group formation, a mass formation, in which a certain part of the population, 20 to 30%,
No, just a second. It's not a classical dictatorship. What you just mean is totalitarianism.
Of course. Sorry for that. Okay. Sorry for the confusion. Yes. In a totalitarian system, people fall prey to a very specific group formation, a kind of mass formation, in which 20 to 30% of the population starts to believe fanatically in a certain narrative or a certain ideology. And they believe so fanatically in it that they cannot take a critical distance from the narrative. They cannot see anymore when the narrative becomes completely absurd. They start to be willing to radically self-sacrifice when the narrative asks them to do so. And most important of all, they start to become radically intolerant for every dissident voice, for everyone who thinks differently. And that's the core of a totalitarian system, this formation of this new group, which believe so fanatically in the narrative that they are willing to report everyone to the state of whom they think that he doesn't follow the narrative strictly enough, meaning that, and I use the words of Hannah Arendt now in her famous book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, meaning that this state system has a huge secret police, namely these 20 to 30% of the population who are willing to report everyone. That's the fundament. That's why a totalitarian system has such a suffocating impact on a population. So that's the difference. And in my book, I explain why this kind of state system emerged for the first time in the 20th century. And the reason is also to be found at the level of that process of mass formation, because mass formation has always existed. But since the 19th century, the mass formation became stronger and stronger and lasted longer and longer. And in the end, it became so stable, this process of mass formation, that it could be used by certain leaders to seize control of society. And that was the reason why this new state system emerged for the first time in the 20th century. Just because before that, the masses were of a different nature, didn't last as long, couldn't be manipulated as effectively, couldn't be used in the same way to form the basis of a new kind of state system. And my book focuses entirely on the question as to what reason this mass formation changed, the nature changed, why it became more stable. And that answer, I think, is to be found at the level of the view on man in the world that became dominant. Since the 19th century, even earlier, we started to believe that the universe is a kind of a machine, a mechanistic phenomenon that can be perfectly understood in a rationalist way, that the human rational thinking, rational theory should be the cornerstone of our human existence and of our human living together. And it is at that level, it is a psychological consequences, both at the level of the elite and at the level of the population, that is the reason why the mass formation became stronger. Can I put it in a nutshell, Roy? What these,
yes, definitely.
Like at the level of the elite, it was this rationalist view on men in the world, which led, and I won't go into detail, which led to the emergence of a new elite, which excessively used indoctrination and propaganda. Indoctrination and propaganda is exactly this rationalist idea that you should lead society on the basis of a rational understanding of the psychological processes in society, and then manipulate these psychological processes through indoctrination and propaganda. So I could go much further, but I won't go. I won't do it. So you have this new elite which used more and more indoctrination propaganda, and at the same time, and that's the most important thing, automatically this mechanist, rationalist view on man in the world put the population, or a major part of it, in a state of loneliness and disconnection, often referred to as the atomization of society. And once people were in this lonely state, they started to be confronted with lack of meaning making. And then once they are lonely, once people feel lonely and are confronted with a lack of meaning making, they, at the affective level, they will typically experience what you refer to as free-floating anxiety, frustration, and aggression. That means a kind of anxiety, frustration, and aggression of which people don't know where it comes from, which people cannot connect to a mental representation. And strangely enough, and it's almost something amazing, this new elite, which uses indoctrination propaganda, developed at the same time and at the same pace with this new psychological state in the population, which is exactly a state where people are sensitive and vulnerable to indoctrination propaganda. And that's why this new state system emerged, which Hannah Arendt called a diabolic pact between the elite and the masses. Because once the population is in this state, and once a narrative is distributed, sometimes unintentionally, like it can be a narrative that is just there. But once a narrative is distributed through the mass media, which indicates an object of anxiety, and at the same time provides a strategy to deal with that object of anxiety, all this free-floating anxiety in the population might connect at once to this object of anxiety provided in a narrative, and people might be willing to participate in a strategy to deal with that object of anxiety, even if the strategy is utterly absurd. And that's what history showed time and time again. The witch hunts to control the witches, the crusades to control the Muslims in the Holy Country, the gulags to control the aristocracy and
the concentration camps in Nazi Germany.
Camps to deal with the Jews. So all these examples are the same. So, it's every time a strategy to deal with an object of anxiety, and the theory is completely absurd in most instances, but it doesn't matter. People connect all their anxiety to it, and they can control their anxiety by participating in a strategy to deal with the object of anxiety. And in this way, they feel connected again. it feels as if they can't escape their loneliness. They feel they are fighting this heroic collective battle.
Can I just, okay, I with your permission, I would like to raise one question and one remark. One is what you said about the mechanistic worldview. If you take rationality out of context of tradition and morality, the laws of eugenics in Nazi Germany were totally rational. By the way, they were immigrant from the US. Like if your view of the world is mechanistic, the world of eugenics, that some people are more suited for society than others, are basically very, very logical. So this is the idea of the mechanistic worldview is very dangerous. And the other thing that I wanted to ask, the 19th century is like the first secular century in history, and the 20th century is like where the secular arguments that were conceived by philosophers in the 19th century became the dominant dogma in politics. And Nazi Germany and Soviet Union are two great examples. Those are two non-God regimes. And since you said that the totalitarian state is a new state, is a new invention of the 20th century, how does it correlate with the idea of no God, and no God with the respect to less meaning? The idea of God that gives meaning, because you also said about the Crusades, and the Crusades were very heavily God feeling based.
Yes, of course. Well, that's one difference between the masses of ancient times and the masses of modern times. Hannah Arendt also highlights that. She says one of the differences between the ancient masses and the modern masses is that the ancient masses were scared of God, and the modern masses are not anymore. So the modern masses are formed on the basis of rationalist narratives, and the entire phenomenon of totalitarianism is a rationalist phenomenon. It's exactly totalitarianism really refers to the idea that the state narrative offers the total truth, a total rational truth, a total rational understanding of society, of humanity, and so on, and that this totalitarian state, that's the delusionary belief of totalitarianism, that this totalitarian state will create a new paradise for the human being, in which finally human existence will be freed of everything that limited it, of disease and even death. That's actually, so the strange thing is, like, we have science, and science always accepts that the limits of rationality. People often think that science in the end will show that our capacity of rational thinking will overcome all limitations. But I know no seminal scientist, no great scientist who says that. To the contrary, all seminal scientists, and I'm talking about Planck, Bohr, Heisenberg, Schrödinger, René Thom, and so on, Mandelbrot, I could continue endlessly. They all claim exactly the opposite. They all say rational understanding is very limited. And in the end, the great scientists really follows rationality in a straight, in a faithful, in a loyal way. And he always ends up at the limits of rationality, where he clearly sees that the essence of life transcends rationality. That's what a great scientist does. But the followers...
So it's not a fluke. That two of the greatest totalitarianism regime in the 20th century were secular. This is basically what you're saying.
Of course. Absolutely.
Okay.
And their first enemies were always the religious people, and then in the second place, the everyone actually who refused to participate in their rationalist ideas.
And the other thing that you said, and which I think might explain why your theories resonate with right conservative people, is the atomization of society. Because in what we know from the US, that the conservative right is much more bounded in family connections, and the left is much more separate. Yes, people in the left live in the city, people in the right live in the village. So maybe the idea mass formation is more likely to be formed in the left, where the atomization of society is much stronger, mainly in the 21st century.
That's, I don't know. Let's say that for me, the atomization of society, I don't know if by protecting classical family structures in a conservative way, we will prevent society of ending up in atomization. I don't know that. I don't say yes, nor do I say no. I think if you have a conservative classical family structure, but everyone uses technology, for instance, mobile phones and so on, you might also end up in an atomized.
This was happened in Iran, because in Iran they had a good family structure, but mass formation, just like you in your great example of the moon, you don't have to be lonely. This is just one thing. I think that the example of Iran demonstrates that you don't have to be lonely in order to be part of this great wave of mass formation.
Not at all. Not at all. Let me first finish my first line of reasoning and then respond to the second one. Because for me, what is crucial is whether or not people can stay in touch with what I often call truth speech of truth telling. Because truth speech is not rational speech. Someone who tells the truth says something that resonates in another human being. And it is this resonance in which people, two different people, start to vibrate at the same frequency, just like two strings that co-vibrate at the same frequency. It's this kind of speech, truth speech, sincere speech, honest speech, which really connects people and which really is the remedy for loneliness and the atomization of society. And my next book is all about that. It's all about how truth speech is a solution, is the remedy, both for the symptom, the major symptom of our society, namely mass formation and totalitarianism, and at the same time is the remedy for the root cause of the symptoms, namely
this is great.
The atomization.
This is great, because it's not rational thing. It's not rational arguments that resonate. It is true speech, true and honest speech. You know, in ancient Jewish wisdom, there is this quote: "Some things that come out of the heart will be entered to another person's heart."
Yeah,
and I think this is what true in this context means. Like, I'm honest, and I'm totally honest, and this honesty resonates with someone else. It's not about the rational argument per se.
It's not, and that's the strange thing is, and that's what something that the Enlightenment tradition ignored, and what people like Sigmund Freud, in an extremely intelligent way, understood in a very early stage of Enlightenment. Freud knew that if you want to make someone speak the truth, you have to ask that person to stop thinking. That's what Freud did with his patient who entered his practice. He asked them, don't think, just tell everything that comes to your mind. That was the shortest route, the shortest way to connect them again with their truth. And so there is a certain field of tension between rational thinking and speaking the truth, which is very interesting, because now we confuse the two. We believe that rationality leads to truth, and it's exactly the opposite, and strangely enough. And I don't say that you have to stop to think rationally, but we should be aware that in the end, the ultimate destiny of the human being is not rational knowledge. Rational knowledge and thinking rationally is like climbing a stairs, which in the end leads to something that transcends rationality. And that's this capacity to resonate with the object you are studying. And at that moment, every theory, every rational theory becomes relative, and you start to understand that every theory actually is a resistance against the pure contact with the object itself, with what I often call the eternal music of life. It's only when you start to realize that your rational thinking is limited that you can open up yourself, stop to lock yourself away in your prison of your own logics and rational thinking, and that you can start to resonate with something that will eternally transcend your rationality. So that's the point, I think. That's
just a second. I'm an observant Jew, so don't take me wrong, but it almost feels like what you try to convey right now, if not religious philosophy, it's spiritual philosophy. Okay, and this again might also explain why people with heavy materialistic point of view will not buy the theory. I buy the theory because, again, I into the idea that rational is limited, there is something beyond. But people with materialistic point of view are having hard time to grasp and digest what you just had to offer. Would you agree?
Yes, to a certain extent I would. Although I think that, in my opinion, what I just said can both be the result of a honest, sincere, rational thinking process, as it can be the result of a religious and mystical approach to life. I think it can be both, and that's what you know. In my life personally, I come from from a religious family, but when I was 17 years old, I found myself to be a complete atheist, and I just couldn't understand how someone could believe that somewhere in this universe a god would be hidden behind the clouds or something. For me, the world at that moment was a material phenomenon. I said, like, well, everything exists of molecules and atoms and subatomic particles. What would otherwise be the basis of the universe? And I just couldn't understand anymore how there could be a god in such a universe. But very slowly, and in my case, by following rationality, I think, and science in a very faithful way, I started to see first that what we call matter and atoms, in the end, is a kind of consciousness, as all the great physicists of the 20th century said. And then, when I was 35 years old, I suddenly started to understand, by learning the mathematical basis of complex dynamical systems theory, that even the rationalist or the rational study of the universe exactly showed us that in the end, the real and each complex dynamical system behaves as an irrational phenomenon, as an irrational number in mathematics. And for me, it suddenly opened my eyes, and I realized that by sticking in a fanatic way to our rational thinking, we do not see the truth. We blind us from the truth. That's the point. And at that moment, we have two possibilities. We can try to close our eyes and continue to believe in the omnipotence of our rational mind, or we can accept that we always will be limited. And that is at that moment, I think, that we can start to really feel reality in a different way, that we can start to really, in this little empty space, this space where we start to realize that we cannot know, it's there that we can start to really be in touch with what transcends all rationality. And so I think, maybe, in my opinion, yes.
And maybe this is why the role of ritual in mass formation is so important. Like, we tend to consider ourselves, we don't need ritual. This is for the ancient. We only count on rational thinking. But you said, no, rituals are extremely important in mass formation because, like you said, this is the ritual of death. So if you can just elaborate on one phrase from your book, the ritual of death.
Of course, like as a human being, we are symbolic beings. And we have this fundamental inherent need to participate in symbolic behavior, just because it's that behavior, that symbolic behavior, that makes us feel our most inner reality and our origins. In the end, the entire universe, I believe, in the end, was a kind of language. The origins of the universe was not a small black matter, in my opinion. No, it was a kind of, it was speech, language. It were thought forms, and symbolic behavior exactly makes us feel our symbolic origins, and that, so we need it. Every human being needs it, because we can ignore that we are symbolic beings, but that will not make us stop being it. And this someone who blindly believes in the material origins of the universe, and who ignores the symbolic dimension of life, ignores the fact that as a human being we are symbolic beings, he will continue to participate in rituals, but he will not recognize them as such. And that's what mass behavior is. Mass behavior is ritualistic behavior that is not recognized as ritualistic behavior. And that's why, in the end, it becomes, the rituals become rituals of death. You can explain that also, but that's would lead us too far, I think, for the format of this interview. But exactly, yes, that's what I believe. Like people who participate in a lot of rich behaviors, who are clearly, in many respects, absurd, actually perform rituals through which they show that they want to sacrifice themselves out of loyalty to a narrative, to something symbolic. So, that's the strange thing. The mass behavior reveals the ultimate nature of the human being without the people who are participating in it realizing it.
And again, the idea is that that you are willing to self-sacrifice, not only you, but your children, and children are willing to sacrifice their parents. You told Tucker Carlson a story about a woman in Iran who told you another story about a woman in the Ayatollah regime just hung her boy, okay, that like looped the rope around his neck, okay, and in this idea of thinking, you are willing to self-sacrifice for the collective. Now, one thing that struck me, I can read your book, and your book, the idea of the psychology of totalitarianism can be approached in two different ways. One in social psychology, okay? And the other is the psychology of personality, okay? And from your book, there is a Solomon Asch experiment. I just want to show it to the guys on YouTube, okay? When you have 3 lines, okay? A, B, and C, and another line. And my question is, does the left line most resemble line A, B, and C? But when you get people into the room, let's say that most people which are participant with the psychologist will say B, okay? Then the idea is that the subject are much more willing to say B, much more willing to go with the flow. This is not the essence of this experiment. Solomon Asch, after the experiment, asks the participant, why did you say B? Why did you say A? And they said, in 30 or 40% of the cases, because this was the correct answer. So it took like 2 minutes with people that you never heard, never met, and you will never meet again to, to change everything that you know about short and long. Okay. By the way, there is a great story that Solomon Asch explained in his autobiography, what led him to investigate the role of influence, and he is advisor of Stanley Milgram. He said that he came to the US when he was 7, I think, in Leila Seder, in Pesach, for the Israeli Jewish thing. And there is a ritual that you pour a wine into a wine glass, and the prophet Eliyahu drinks from the wine. And many generation of kids, stare at the wine bottle, stare at the cup and try to see the level of the wine goes down. And his uncle said, listen, Shlomo, if you look closely, you will see that the wine level goes down. And Solomon Asch looked at the wine when he was 7, and he saw that the wine level goes down. And he said this was the first thing or the first encounter with how strong social psychology can be. And he explained it in the first page of his autobiography. But there is another way to approach what you just said with the psychology of personality, which Jordan Peterson is more likely to do. But I think you didn't go this path. So if I ask you, okay, what kind of people are more willing to be part of this mass formation? Could you tell me something?
Well, that's a very tough question to answer, because it has been time and time again, people have asked this question. All scholars who have studied mass formation since the 19th century have stumbled upon that question, and everyone had to conclude that it's almost impossible to answer that question. For instance, there was the famous mass formation which happened in France during the Dreyfuss Affair, which you will probably know. Most people fell prey to a mass formation, believing that Dreyfuss was guilty, that he was a traitor, that he just should be sentenced and so on. But there was a small group of people who said, no, we don't believe he is guilty, and at least he needs a new trial, because the trial hasn't been done in a fair way. And the most famous of them was Émile Zola, of course, who wrote this pamphlet.
J'accuse.
J'accuse, yes, indeed. And so for a certain reason, there was a small group of people who didn't fall prey to the mass formation. And also there, certain scholars asked, like, what was the characteristics of this small group of people? And nobody could answer it, because they came from all directions, all kinds of social backgrounds, and they just, for a moment, formed one group, and then they disappeared again. This group disintegrated and disappeared again. I think that in the end, whether or not we fall prey to a mass formation depends on the position we take, how we position towards the truth. We can always take the easy way in life and just go along with the loudest voice and the largest group in society, because it seems always that is the easiest way. Or we can take the difficult way and stay loyal to the words that emerge in ourselves and that seem sincere and honest words, and try to articulate these words. And that always seems the difficult way. And only few people do it. But there are so many people. When a mass formation emerges, when everyone starts to believe in these narratives, there are many people that feel that there is something wrong, and that feel how certain words emerge that they could articulate, but of which they know that they might put them in a problematic situation. And so it seems that most people prefer not to articulate these words. And I think that's this fundamental choice, this choice that cannot be reduced to any other choice, not to the molecules in your head or the biochemist process in your head. It's the most fundamental choice a human being can make. Will I articulate the words that emerge in myself, that seem sincere and honest? Will I articulate this most singular, individual, unique truth, which is at the same time, and that's strange, the truth is always singular, individual, but the strange thing is that if we articulate it, it touches a universal string. And so it's at the same time strictly singular and strictly universal. So the truth is a paradox, and that's good. It cannot be else than a paradox. But I think, and you cannot reduce it to anything else.
Just a second, but you said that high intelligence is not a shield against mass formation. On the contrary, people with high IQ or high IQ people are more susceptible to be part of this mass formation. I think this is very intriguing. How, because again, rational thinking doesn't play any significant role in the mass formation process.
No, well, the higher the level of education, the more people become susceptible for mass formation. So it's the level of education that is the important factor. I'm not aware of research or people who wrote about the correlation between intelligence and mass formation. It could be that intelligence is a protective factor, but I doubt it. But the level of education definitely shows a positive correlation with the vulnerability for mass formation. The higher the level of education, the more susceptible for mass formation.
I think there is a famous quote by who wrote 1984?
George Orwell.
George Orwell, that some nonsense are so full, are so stupid that only academics can believe in them. And I think this is also one of the things. And another quote, which I think really resonated with what you said, is a quote from that attributed to Edmund Burke. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph in the world is that good men do nothing. And if I just want to paraphrase your ideas, don't speak their own truth. And you said if a large enough people, large enough group in society, and we come to the numbers shortly, say the truth, it will intervene with the hypnosis process, okay? I try to hypnotize you, but there is a little nudge of, no, it's not true, it's not true. And this process, if it's done with, I think, what is the minimum amount of what is the minimum size of this group that keep nudging that, no, this is not the truth. This is a false narrative.
I think we need only one person, but mathematically speaking. But the problem is that you will never find one person who can speak the truth enough without other people with whom he can resonate. So we need a certain amount of people, but not too much, definitely. It's much more important, I think, that the group of people is very determined and realizes that what it has to do is not offering a rational counter-argumentation against the mass narrative. It's simply that they have to continue to try to do their best to speak the truth. This means that they just say, like, look, for me, this doesn't feel right. And I will just don't care about this matrix of social rules which tries to tell me what I should do, or with all these ideal images that are projected onto me. No, I will just express what I feel in myself that makes me have the intuition that this narrative cannot be true. And I will not even try to convince you. That's very important. The most effective speech is speech that doesn't try to convince the other, but a kind of speech in which the speaker just lives up to his ethical duty of articulating the words that seem sincere and honest to him, without trying to convince. The less we try to convince, the more effective it will be. And we should always watch out, that's extremely important, that we do not fall prey ourselves to a little mass formation, because that also happens. You had the large mass formation of the dominant narrative, but there were several smaller mass formations which also emerged. And so, and as long as we really practice this art of truth speech, sincere speech, we will not fall prey to the mass formation. Because to fall prey to a mass formation, you have to start to share opinions, to share ideal images, to share narratives, rather than speaking from what your most original intuition.
And sometimes it will be hard, and sometimes it will be hard because as the mass formation grows, people will prevent you from speaking out your own ideas. I was invited today to a Ministry of Education to just go over a book that part of the people in the Israeli government say, no, this is not good this book is not good just because of the current crisis in Israel. So it is very hard in the progress stages of mass formation to speak out, because people will say, no, what you're doing now is hate speech, and what you're doing now is racist, and many other things. And so it's very hard. And my last question, because I promised that we finish in 5 minutes, is you said, okay, what do you need to do in order to stop this process of mass formation? But what if we don't succeed? If we don't succeed, we should try to anticipate to what will be the results, like Nazi Germany and Soviet Union, that we need someone from outside to take care of things?
Yes, and that's what probably won't happen now, because we are witnessing the emergence of a worldwide narrative, which, if it leads to fully fledged totalitarianism, it will be a worldwide system. And that exactly takes away the hope that an external enemy will destroy the system. So there is only one way. It's internal resistance. And what went wrong in Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, according to Hannah Arendt, was the fact that the resistance at a certain time chose to go underground. They stopped speaking out in public space because it became too dangerous. And at least that was their perception. And by doing that, they eliminated themselves. Because in a classical dictatorship, it can be, strategically speaking, a good choice to stop speaking out in public space, but not in a totalitarian state, because a totalitarian state is a psychological war where you give the enemy the full support of the masses if you stop to speak out. That's why the first rule is continue to speak out now that it is still time. Now that the system didn't reach the point yet, or the mass formation didn't reach the point yet, that it feels that it should destroy each and everyone who doesn't go along with them. That's the first rule. Continue to speak out. And if we speak out in the right way, two things will happen. The mass formation will slow down, and slowly the sincere speech will lead to the emergence of a real group, which is not a mass. And a mass is a kind of group which is formed not because individuals love each other and connect to each other, resonate with each other. No, a mass is a group which is formed because each individual separately resonates with the collective ideal, the collective theory. And in the end, in a mass, the solidarity with the collective ideal is much stronger than the solidarity with other individuals. It is as if the solidarity with the collective sucks away all the love and all the energy from the bonds between individuals and injects them all in the bond between the individual and the collective. And so that's the explanation why, in the end, even the solidarity of a mother with her child is less strong than the solidarity of the mother with the collective. And that's exactly why she reports her own child to the collective. So that's the typical characteristic of a mass as a group. A really humane group, a real group, is a group that is formed because individuals connect to each other, resonate with each other. And that's exactly what the act of truth speech realizes. The act of truth speech makes people resonate with each other. So truth speech is quintessential in a totalitarian system. And as soon as it leads to the emergence of a new group, which is not formed on the basis of a shared collective ideal, also not a resistance against the large group or the dominant discourse, no, purely the love for truth speech and for other human beings, if this forms a new group, it will be a group that exists of strong bonds between individuals, and this group will easily become more strong. It will become the leading principle. It will be stronger as a psychological agent than even the most sophisticated propaganda machinery and the mass formation that propaganda machinery creates. So that's what should happen. I don't know if it will work. Let's hope so. But if you understand what is going on, then you know that there is no choice, because if you go along with a totalitarian system, you might also fall prey for it. That's exactly what is so typical for totalitarian systems. In the end, they become a monster that devours its own children. So Stalin killed most of the members of his communist party. That's exactly what a totalitarian system does. So as soon as you understand that, you know it makes no sense to try to be safe by joining the totalitarian system. No, become a man, a human being, and choose to speak out. And maybe we can never be sure that we will not lose our jobs and our money and even not our lives. Let's hope that it is not necessary. But we are not sure that we will keep our money and our house and our lives if we join the system as well. So we should make sure that we don't lose the only thing that is really important. It's just our humanity, our principles. Let's choose for that. And that's one thing we can be sure that we can keep them and own them.
You know, the idea of the collective that shades the individual connection. It's like people who love humanity but hate real people. Now, this was Mattias. Thank you so much for this great conversation. It was mind-blowing. And you will be in Israel at the end of this civil year 2023. And we will publish your lecture here. So please keep in touch. In the meantime, there is a website where Mattias publish long essays and respond to many other viewers. So please check out this website as well. Mattias Desmet from Belgium, the author of The Psychology of Totalitarianism. Thank you so much for your time. It was an eye-opening conversation.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Roy. And thank you for referring to my Substack page, which indeed where I publish these essays. Yes, people can follow me there if they want. And I hope to meet some of you in Israel by the end of this year. I'm very happy.
I personally cannot wait until we meet
Wonderful.
face to face.
Likewise.
Bye, Mattias. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
On this channel, you will see the authors of these books and many more having great conversations with me. Please subscribe, hit the bell button, and be part of this great community. See you in the next video.